Hi everyone, you're with Lucy from Art Shed Angel, and today I want to show you how to paint this cute little owl baby. So it's a little easy project in watercolors, pretty simple to do. So I hope you join me and let's get started. For this image, I am using my Schmincke paints, and I'm using Ultramarine Blue, Burnt Sienna, Magenta, and Cad Yellow. I'm also using my size 12, 8, and 6 Escoda versatil brushes, but any watercolor brushes will do. And I'm using a size 3 rigger. I'm also using 2 pencils in this. One is a Lumocolor, which is a wax-based pencil, and also I'm using a Prismacolour pencil in French grey. You don't need to have both of those, but you'll see what I do with them, and they are very, very useful. So I'm going to start with painting this little owl, and I'm going to just do a little bit of colour in the background first, just so that I've got a little bit of an idea of how dark and how light I want to be. But the first thing I'm going to do is do some background. So I'm keeping this to quite simple colours. I've got yellow. I'm just going to put that there. So this is Cad Yellow. And I'm going to then also take a little bit of blue, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make just a light green to go into the background. So I don't want to have too much colour, so I'm just using a fairly wet brush and kind of just doing a speckle of green. I don't really want too much behind him, but I also don't really want to do it later. So I'm just giving a little bit of green in that background. I'm going to take a tiny bit of blue and just flick a little bit of colour as well. I'm just doing this so I can just wipe it away if I end up with too much where I don't want it. Just a couple little spots here and there, just to give the hint that there could be some trees or something there behind him. So that's just the beginning of what I'm going to do. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is give him a light wash of a grey blue colour. And one of the best greys you can mix is taking a bit of burnt sienna. So this is a lovely, these are my Schmincke paints, and I'm just taking the burnt sienna and cleaning my brush, and then taking some ultramarine blue, and this makes the most terrific grey. Now I want this grey to be slightly on the brown side, so I am going to take just a little bit more of the brown, and you can see here that warms the brown up. And what I'm going to do first is a little bit of a light wash over the top of him. You can see it's going to be quite watery, and I want it to be quite light. So I'm just, actually probably still too dark, giving him the very lightest wash. This will dry a lot lighter than what it is now, but it just gives me my base colour. And of course, with watercolours, the more water you add, the lighter the colour will get. You've just got to be thinking a little bit about how much colour you're picking up when you're starting to paint. So I'm pretty happy with that colour. Just to make it, jazz it up a little bit, I'm letting this green bleed into here, and I'm also just going to take a tiny bit of that blue, and on the cooler side of him, which is this sort of shadowy side, I'm just going to drop a bit of the cool blue into the mix. Now, what works beautifully here is because I've used the blue and the burnt sienna to mix my actual colour, I don't have any trouble here when I try to mix them together. You can see how that they really colour harmonise beautifully right from the start. And I'm just looking at areas where I think it needs a little bit of a blue tinge. Now this is just to make him have shape straight from the get-go, basically. So you can see that he already has a little bit of shape. All right, well, I'm going to dry that off, let that dry for a moment. But while you're waiting for that, you can do things like I'm just going to take a little bit more brown this time, and I'm just going to put an undercoat on this log. So he's just standing on a log and just giving it a bit of an undercoat. And also I'm going to take a little bit of the yellow. Oh, that was a lot of yellow. A little bit of the yellow, and I'm just going to paint his little feet in. But basically I'm just undercoating areas at this moment. Nothing more than that. So we'll wait for that to dry and we'll do the next step. Now, birds need to have beautiful eyes, or anything needs to have beautiful eyes. So what I'm going to do is create the eyes. I really like to work on the eyes. It kind of gets me a connection with the actual thing that I'm painting. So I'm going to take this little bit of yellow. So this is cad yellow, and I'm going to paint in the yellow in his eyes. Now I have changed to a finer brush for this. I'm using an 8, but you could use something slightly smaller if you feel like you need to. I'm just adding that yellow into his eyes. Now I'm going to paint his highlights in with some white paint. Now you can leave the highlights, but sometimes I find that a little bit hard in the sense that, you know, you're being so careful to paint around things that you're actually not really getting the gist of it. Now that needs to be quite dry before I mix myself. Now I'm going to mix quite a pure bit of ultramarine, burnt sienna, and a little bit of alizarin crimson to get quite a dark colour. And they need to be fairly pure, otherwise you're going to not get as dark a colour as you want. So with this dark colour, I'm now going to paint in his iris. And I am trying to see a little bit where the highlights are in this, sorry, pupil, not iris. The last bit was the iris. So I'm just painting in. And you could even use a finer brush when you're doing this. Just having a look at how it goes around. Not a lot of yellow at the top there. Quite a little bit of highlight actually. And then I'm just going to outline it because that's one of the other things here. His eyes quite outlined. So I'm just looking at the shape. So you keep referring back to your picture. Now the picture that you can look at is my painted picture, and that will be a download if you want to have a look at it from my website. So head over there to have a look. So we've got these quite big eyes, but they're very yellow at the moment, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet them, dry them off. And I'm going to mix a tiny bit of, I'm using a smaller brush, I'm going to mix a tiny bit of the burnt sienna. So that's this colour here. I'm going to mix a little bit of that in the yellow, because I can see kind of an orangey tinge to his yellow eye. So we want to get that orangey tinge in. And you can kind of see that's around the edges. So this is where you need to start really observing what's there. So I'm doing this orangey tinge. You can see that livens the eye up already. Right down here, because that yellow was a little bit cool. A bit more yellow there than it is over here, so I'll just put a tiny bit more in. Okay, and then I'm going to take some of that grey I made before, just very light, and I'm just going to darken under his eye here, because it's just got a little bit of darkness, actually just under the highlights, to be honest, and a bit of darkness there. And you can also start to add that little bit of darkness around his eye, just to make him look like his eye belongs in his body. So whilst you've just got two big eyes, obviously you're going to have quite a harsh looking picture, but once we start to get those other colours in, we end up with a much more interesting picture. Okay. I'm just going to add a little bit of grey here, because this eye, even though it's got a highlight, the highlight's not super white. We are going to put a nice white highlight in there, but it's not super white. Okay, so we've got a little bit of niceness happening. Now I'm going to use a little bit of white gouache because I have a little bit more control over the white gouache. And I'm going to use a fine brush. And oops, bit of an out of control hair there. And you can see here that there's a highlight coming around there, and then the highlight goes a little bit lighter. Well, it's not, it can be a little bit more grey just here. Everybody thinks that a highlight needs to be super white. You've got to actually be careful how white you do your highlight. This eye here has a very grey highlight, so I'm just kind of being very careful how bright I make it. So far, I'm pretty happy with his eyes, and I'm going to leave them for a little bit. The only thing I might do is just with my black pen, I've got very textured paper, but just with my black pen, I'm just going to neaten this pupil a little bit. There we go. So we've got these lovely big eyes, and now we can work on the rest of them. Now I feel connected to this little fellow now because I've got these big eyes, and let's get working on the rest. So I'll just take him out. So now I've got the rest of him to look at. Now I am actually going to use some Prismacolour pencils to help me in getting some of these light feathers. Now I'm going to use some light Prismacolour pencils. I'm not using white, and one of the reasons I'm not using white is because I don't believe any of these areas are truly white. So what I'm going to use is a light Prismacolour. This one's called French Grey, and I'm going to start to colour. Now this is a little hard to see, but I'm just going to add some little bits of white where I think the white is. Now you can use a white china graph for this as well, and you probably can't see a lot of what I'm doing, but it will show up when I start to paint. And the drier your paper is, the more that this will actually show up. So this is going to keep this lightness to my picture. Now, some of you might be going, that's cheating, you're using an other product. But Prismacolour pencils, because they're wax-based, give you a little bit of help with getting some of those details in. So I do recommend that you give them a go. And I'm just putting it in places, and I am going to change to my white one just for a certain group of feathers. So this one here is a Lumocolor pencil, and what it will do, it will reject the watercolors. So some places, instead of using a resist that you have to paint on, if I'm not planning on making it darker, I can just do this and it will resist the color, which is pretty fantastic. And I'm also an artist that likes to get a result, so I'm not sort of as concerned about it being absolutely perfect. What I'm concerned about is getting the picture how I want it. So you can't see a lot of that, but you will see a bit as we start to paint. So he is definitely got a lovely sort of burnt sienna kind of look to him, but I'm going to put a little tiny bit of yellow into that burnt sienna and make him a little bit brighter than he even is there. And I'm going to do some light washes to start off with. And just put them where I see that lovely burnt sienna look. Now, I don't want to cover everything that I've put here, because you can see here by dry brushing, you can see that resist already working there. How good is that? I'm just going to take that burnt sienna and lightly putting it on him. And you can see the resist that's happening where I've got that pencil. Now I want to have a soft edge there, so I'm just going to take my damp brush and soften that edge a little bit. I want to make that edge a little bit harsher with some darker color, not with this color. So again, just taking it through. Doesn't have a lot of that burnt sienna in his face. It's more of a darker brown in there. So, and you can see now by having his eyes in there, you've already sort of connected with him. I find that when I do animals, if I do their eyes first, I absolutely connect with them and I enjoy painting them so much more. So just a thought. Not everybody a lot of people like to finish with eyes, and I usually would finish with detail on many things, but when I do an animal, I kind of like to play. So I'm even a bit dry brushing this because I still want to see those highlights in here. And you can see that I've got those lovely kind of feather highlights. And how easy was that to do that without too much trouble? So he's pretty much at the ugly stage, and I always like to talk about the ugly stage because there is a stage in every painting where you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, that doesn't look right. And that's your ugly stage, and we always will have that. So now I'm just using the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue, and I'm making a slightly darker brown because I can see down here that he is quite a bit darker. So let's, while he's still wet, drop in some of those dark areas that I can see. I can see some dark areas here. And under his head, I can see dark areas. I'm not worrying about cauliflower edges or anything like that when I paint this bird, because to be honest, I really think that the more texture you get into this, the better. Now he's brighter on that side, so I'm going to drop a little bit of yellow into that side. Just brighten him up a little bit. And he's going pretty well. I'm just going to darken this log a little bit too and use up some of this extra paint. So you can see here you can create quite a good brown just with your burnt sienna and your ultramarine blue. So we're only going to use 4 colours with this particular image. So again, I've done that. He's still drying, but I'm going to do a little bit on his face, and that needs to be a little bit more on the blacky grey side. So instead of just wasting this paint here, I've added a little bit more blue to it, and now I start to look at the shapes that he's got here, and he's got this lovely kind of dark area. This is a real beginner's kind of, just to get you used to doing a bit of paint mixing. You can use these resist pencils. See, I can see from his eye it's darker, and he's got like almost an eyebrow there, which I'm trying to emulate. Eyebrow comes up, not actually an eyebrow, but now this side is lighter, so I'm just going to put a little bit more water into my paint so that when I do these feathery bits on this side, I don't overwork it. I don't make it too dark. Don't be very careful with detail that you don't overdo it. And here I can see that it is a little bit dark, and a little bit more of the 2 of those. You see, the more brown you put in, the more it darkens. And then I can see under here, what we want to do is create this dark edge. So the only way we can do it is by doing the reverse of it. So in doing that, we're creating this feather effect here. But we need to be careful that when we get to this, we don't just let it dry. We take our brush, dampen it, and just spread that a little bit so that we've got that definite shape to his head. This whole wing here I'm going to do slightly darker. And then down here, I'm going to darken him again. So you can see how his eyes don't look so misplaced now. Looking at this. Always work on an animal in the direction of their feathers. So you can see here the feathers go out from this side of him. So I'm being very careful, and I'm leaving highlights so that his face has a bit of shape. Now I can see there's a little bit of yellowy orange in here, so I'm just going to add a bit more of that there. And you can see how he starts to appear, just that negative bit of painting there. Now he has quite a dark little bit here, so I'm just going to put that just here under his chin. And that looks super dark at the moment, but it connects to this feathery area. Now to do reverse feathers, you just need to paint them in that way. You can see there, that looks awfully dark at the moment, but it will definitely dry lighter. Just here and there, drag it out. Looks like he's eaten a few too many chocolates, doesn't it? And just a tiny bit of blue in here to change the colour. So I'm going to let that bit dry just so that I can have a look at him again. I can see that I think I need to add some darkness here because his eye needs to seem like it's within the picture. So because he's got an eye socket, we want to actually enhance that eye socket. And I'm just looking at his beak and putting some dark areas on his beak, being very careful that I still keep that highlight on the front of his beak. Okay, so let's have a look at the rest of his body. I'm not going to paint every feather into this little character. What I'm going to do is create brush strokes that might emulate feathers. And then on top of his head, he's got some darker ones there, a little bit too much. If you put too much paint down, just use your tissue to clean it up. A little bit more of the orange colour here. And then he's got quite orangey brown feathers coming down here. And that's a definite shaped feather, that one. And you can, I like to just dry brush the shapes in. If you leave little white areas, see how we start to get texture? Now, we know that he's made of feathers, so do we need to paint every feather, or do we use the fact that we actually can imagine those feathers? So what I want to do here is a few lines because they're feathers that are folded over, and then I want to make a little bit more of that very dark one because this is under his feathers. So we want to create under these highlights, we want to create some real darkness, and here too some lines of darkness, and under this little shoulder bit. And I'm dropping this in while it's wet, so it just naturally spreads on its own, and I'm not brushing it in too much. I can see here that he's got some feathers, some quite dark little feathers coming through. Through here he's got some little feathers. And basically now I'm just looking at where I drop darker and lighter colours. So right down the centre of that beautiful feather that we've got there, I'm just going to put some detail in. And I'm also going to just put in the shapes for his feet. And I'm just loving how I'm still getting those highlights coming through. And, you know, that's really helped. So while this is nearly dry, so I can see there that that's spreading too much, so I'll stop putting extra colour there. But I can see that there's some really sweeping little feathers coming from this edge here. And some dark areas. One of the things that, you know, we can teach you when we teach painting to, you know, technique, but one of the things that you have to learn to do is really look at your picture. Really look at your picture and go, there's a little bit something there, there's a little bit of something over there, and work in that way. So this one's a good one because we're not using too many colours. You can see there by just putting that shadow area here on the side of his beak, and I want to just put some more of this. I want to get these funny little feather effects around his eye, as well as he almost has this beautiful eyeliner. So just Again, dropping these little bits of dark where I can see them. It's really nice and dark here. Okay, so he's starting to look quite good. I don't know how much extra I'd like to do to that. This is just a simple study, but here I can see there is some dark. I like his little eyebrows. I don't know why. And then he's got a few little bits of dark through there, and even some very fine bits there. Okay, so we'll let him dry for a moment and we'll come back and just put some extra detail in, but he's nearly done. Okay, so he's pretty dry, and now I want to put some nice detail into his feet. So I want to take some of this wash of the orangey colour, and I don't really like to overly highlight feet and things like that. I'm just going to make it white textured. He's got quite stubby little feet, both being a baby owl. Okay, now I'm just going to mix some more of that dark colour. Isn't it amazing how few colours you can actually use to create an image? So I'm using this dark colour now because I do want to create some darkness here, a shadow where he's on the branch. So we want to have some definite darkness. And then I'm also going to put some bark-like, to just make it a little bit thicker, too much water. Now he is a touch bland, and one of the reasons he's a touch bland is he just needs some brighter colours put into him. And I'm going to use a little bit of magenta. This one's just quinacridone magenta from the Schmincke paints. Lovely, beautiful, clean magenta colour. And I'm going to take a little bit of the ultramarine blue, and that's going to make a purple. And you're probably going, oh my God, why would you want to do purple? I'm going to add a little bit of purple into my dark brown. And I'm doing that so that when I start to do some darker areas, just the final darker areas, that what I'm having in those darker areas is just a bit of difference, a bit of that complementary colour. So even though you can't sort of see it as a definite purple, it just adds that little bit of liveliness to the brown. You can see that how I'm just putting a tiny bit of it on, and it automatically brings a liveliness to the brown. So it will dry lighter, of course. But it definitely brings a bit of life to it. A little bit here. Okay, and then I'm going to use my fine brush with as strong as I can mixture of ultramarine and dark blue, and I'm just going to paint texture in his little claws. put a little bit more darkness under his belly. This is a very dark area here, so it doesn't hurt to add that dark area. Now this whole foot would be in shadow, so even though you did the undercoat of yellow, you want that foot to be in darkness, and so be very careful that you don't end up with a bright yellow foot. Just having a look here and there and going, what can I add? Loving that purpley colour. I'm loving that the purple colour has just changed the brown enough. And to finish off, I'm going to put a little bit of that up here in the centre bit too. But I'm also going to take some of that gouache, a little bit of that white gouache on my brush, and those areas that I had the white on, I'm just going to give them more of a feathery look. The gouache seems to go fine over the pencil. And I can see that he has really nice, actually, I guess some sort of feathery little bits and pieces. And here just on his eye, just around his eye, I'm going to add some nice white highlights going in to direct you to his eye. And here and there we have a few kind of soft feathers. Always working in the direction of the feathers. Okay, apart from a few little bits here and there that I can see, I'm pretty happy with how he's turned out. And the only thing I'm going to do is take a little bit of darker. So I'm seeing here, I would probably even go as far as going and grabbing a Payne's grey and just adding some darker. So this is where the only place I'm going to add some extra. I want this log nice and dark. So if you've got a Payne's grey, you can absolutely use it there, or you can again just mix the darkest colour you can with the colours you have, which pretty much is a nice dark colour. So I'm just putting some texture in. As it dries, I'll have a look back at it and make sure my shadows are really good. And to finish it off, because I've got that green, I'll take a little bit of that green and just put it there as well. I think it needs that little touch. And I'm going to finish him off with some few little taps of colour in the background. And a little bit of yellow. Okay. And what's really nice is if you've got these little bits that are blopping, you know, quite harshly like that, just squish them in. I like to squish them in so that they're nice and soft, but they're there. And I'm pretty happy with this little fellow. Oh, obviously, you can always add extra. I'm just adding a little bit here to make him a bit brighter on that side. But I think that he's quite fine. So I hope you give this little exercise a go. It's only a quick one. I know I've done the video in full time because I really wanted you to see. I'm looking at his eye and I'm thinking to myself, you could add even a little bit more orange to his eye, but I'm going to leave him, and I hope you give this one a try. We'll see you later. Bye.